Now, I tend to be fairly reserved and balanced when it comes to reviewing things. Is so incomprehensibly bad. It's garbage. Netflix needs to fire whoever is making these decisions.
That's flaccid, sloppy writing.
But today is a day of celebration because it's a spaced repetition app that is actually fun to use. Woohoo! Ah! Hi there, my name's Lamont. Welcome to Days of French and Swedish, where I talk about what it's really like to learn a language when you're doing it for real and not just pretending to do it. So if you want to learn a language and you're serious about that goal, then hang around, subscribe, check out other videos, all that kind of stuff. And today I'm talking about a spaced repetition style program called Lingvist. Now, if you're going to be one of those people who's like, I think you'll find that the spaced repetition algorithm used by Anki was developed by Vygotsky over an entire decade and then programmed by Elon Musk himself, and is therefore superior by 0.08% to that which was developed by your so-called linguist at Lingvist, your software is redundant. Then leave your comment, get it out of your system, and then just go away, because this channel is not about data points, it's about learning languages and actually doing it. And because we're all about learning languages for real, a language-specific flashcard app that is actually fun to use is mind-blowing, because as far as I'm concerned, that has not existed up until now. Now, before we go any further, I want to thank Jakob for recommending that I try Lingvist, he being one of the few who commented on an app review with something more intelligent than, "No, you're wrong, Duolingo is still the best." Well, that comment showed me you've certainly rendered my analysis of 5 other programs completely invalid because you managed to spell most of your words correctly. Those comments don't get to me or anything. So what is Lingvist and what isn't it? This is important. Lingvist is a high-level flashcard-style vocabulary building tool, although it's not technically flashcards. But it has some additional features, some other features. It's sort of like spaced repetition on steroids. But it is not a full language acquisition program like, for example, Babbel or my personal favorite, Busuu. In my opinion, a completely spherical, all-in-one, beginner to proficient language learning program does not yet exist. But Busuu is as close as anything comes, it's just still not quite there. Although I'm a big fan of Lingvist, it's not competing with Busuu. It's like a Toyota Corolla is not competing with a bus. They are separate things, they're used for different purposes. Lingvist is best used to improve your vocabulary in a language that you already have some understanding of. How much is some? Assuming you come from English, they only have Spanish, German, French, and Russian. And in those first 3, so not Russian, any exposure to those languages will probably do, and possibly even no exposure, although I don't think that that would be particularly efficient. But if you've done, say, almost half of your Duolingo tree, then you can probably get onto Lingvist now. For Russian, it's the same, but again, it's going to be extremely inefficient unless you speak Russian already a little bit. So basically I'm saying that because Russian words can't be easily inferred or guessed, it's going to be better if you have a slightly higher level of Russian than you did for the other 3, if that's what you're using it for. This brings me to what I love about this thing. The ceiling is so high. It finally feels like a program for intermediate to advanced learners rather than just beginners. As opposed to, say, Mondly, I could have written the Mondly Swedish course. It's such rudimentary content. Lingvist is basically more effective the more advanced a learner you are. So one question you might have is, how have they done this? Okay, I'm not a programmer, but it seems to be through very intelligent algorithms that they've done it. It asks you to take a test if you've already studied the language, and it's a reasonably in-depth test, and it keeps assessing your level as long as it's taking that test, and it seemed to pinpoint me exactly, because after that, it was just drilling me, hitting my jugular on stuff that I did not know. And on top of that, its method for teaching words that it discovers you don't know is very subtly effective. It gives you a few shots as soon as you've gotten it wrong, so that the first thing that happens after you get it wrong is that you get it right. And then maybe 2 or 3 questions later, it'll ask you that again. Also, just a quick side note to that, I did have another account where I pretended not to know any French just to see if the level would be more basic. But as soon as I got a couple of questions right, it said, "It looks as if you know some French." And it started bringing me up to things that I did not know. It's very clever. There's also some other cool stuff, but in the interests of time, I want to get straight to where I prefer something like this to Anki or even Link, and that's a whole other thing that I'll talk about a bit more in depth. With Anki and Link, you're basically always being asked to assess yourself. Did you know this word? Did you not know this word? Was it a little bit familiar to you? Was it very familiar to you? Did you almost have it? Blah, blah, blah. It's technically more accurate, but to me it's a time sink. It's counterintuitive, but Lingvist working that information out for itself is preferable by far, because that's like 2 to 4 seconds of every word saved and spent instead on seeing more words. That might not sound like much, but in 100 reviewed words, that's like 6 to 8 minutes, which is time to do another kind of 60 to 70 words. Plus, in order to show that you do actually know it, you have to type it, which in itself is learning because it's reinforcing as you type it. I'd only be guessing, of course, but I think if we were to look at 1 hour spent on each of the programs I've named, I would say that the actual time spent learning your language on Lingvist is like 80 to 90% of that hour, while Anki might be 50% at best once you account for all the stuffing around at the start, and Link, I'm not sure, but it's time to talk about why Lingvist is better than Link anyway. Now I know I'm going to cop a bit of flack for this, but humans are drawn to good design. When it comes to apps and computer programs, this is truer than ever. Because it's not just about aesthetics. Aesthetics are really important, but it's also about knowing where everything you want to do is located. Which tabs are things under? How do I see all the words I've learned today, etc. And while doing all that, making it look good. Look at DUOLINGO. It's not a coincidence that it's the most popular language learning app. It looks right and it's easy to navigate. Big companies spend literally millions of dollars getting this stuff right. Memrise might have spent a couple of $1,000s on their interface, and I think Link spent $5.83. I mean, look at it. Every time I try to give Link another chance, I'm like, ugh, I'd forgotten about that. And it's not that I deliberately avoid any of these programs because of their user interface. It's worse than that. I subconsciously avoid them. I know this sounds extreme, but I promise I'm not making this up. After one evening of using Lingvist, I was excited to get back on it the next day. Now, you can ridicule me for being a sucker for gilded baubles or all that glisters, but think about the actual ramifications of that. A serious language learning tool that in 4 days, I would say, has boosted my French noticeably. That I am subconsciously drawn back to using. This is life-changing. This last 4 days has contained the most effortless French I've ever learned, except for the word situation and croissant. But jokes aside, do you see what I'm getting at? All the psychology of learning and fancy algorithms in the world will get you nowhere if we, the users, cannot motivate ourselves to use the app. It's that simple. In that regard, Lingvist has the spaced repetition style learning market cornered. Now this video is getting on a bit. My one about Busuu was over 15 minutes and that was with almost half of it cut. With Lingvist, I haven't talked about the priced version versus the free version, the range of languages, and I haven't discussed the other features and how they work, and there are some things that could be improved that I want to talk about too. So there will be a part 2 to this video. It should be about 3 days away, and we'll talk about all that stuff then. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in part 2. So I was going to do this thing where I lit sparklers and just had clips of me holding them, and as you can see, that's not going heaps well. That's my celebration.